The language we speak appears to shape how we think. You may perceive of the future to be in front of you and the past behind you, but some people see the past in front of them and the future behind them. Languages are powerful ways that we connect to other people, to ourselves, and to our history.
Many languages are dying at an alarming rate.
The world is facing unprecedented language loss, and there are reasons behind that. If you are someone who has not been able to commit to learning a language, what stopped you? If you are a monolingual English speaker, you've possibly never been presented with need to learn another language because you've become so accustomed to other people speaking English.
So I wonder, just knowing different languages, how that would influence your perception of the world around you.
I think
today's guest is digital journalist and creator Sophia Smith-Galer. She's the author of How to Kill a Language, and together we discuss the health benefits of language learning, why it's important to keep endangered languages alive, and what's happening to language in the age of AI. Now, if you want to learn more about improving your health with simple habits, you can pre-order my book, This is Vital Information. The links are in the description below. Now, before we get started, if you're enjoying what you're hearing, please consider subscribing to the podcast because it really helps to reach even more people. Thank you very much. Now, on to Sophia. Sophia, welcome to the show. There is so much that we could talk about since you cover such a wide gamut of things online. And I think it must be said, first of all, you must be one of the first journalists who adopted TikTok and social media in its real form and actually started creating educational material and covering news and newsworthy content on social media. Through your journalism, you've covered so many different things from sexual health to languages, and that's one of your passions as well. There seems to be a huge rabbit hole, a deep rabbit hole on social media where people talk about languages, and it's definitely one of my amateur interests, learning languages and the etymology. You've covered different languages across the world, specifically about how many languages are dying at an alarming rate. I mean, I think nearly half are expected to go extinct in the next 50 to 100 years. Why is that a passion of yours, and why should people care about preserving them?
What does a language mean to you? And that question will be answered quite differently depending on if someone's monolingual or multilingual and how they met those languages. A lot of us will have met those languages because it's the language our grandmother spoke to us in or our mother spoke to us in. Some of those languages we met because we were fascinated by them and committed to what for lots of us is lifelong study of these languages. These really are long-term relationships that we build in our lives. And languages are powerful ways that we connect to other people, to ourselves, and to our history. And when that link is disturbed, we know that things can go wrong. At the moment, the world is facing unprecedented language loss. And there are reasons behind that. So in my book that I've been writing, and that will be out next year, it's literally called How to Kill a Language, because each chapter will be exploring almost different weapons of murder, different reasons why a community, a family, or a person may be severed from a language that they did not want to be severed from. They've come to speak other languages, often more powerful languages or dominant languages where they live, that are perceived to have greater use or value compared to this other language that they have, great personal attachment to. There are possibly even health implications to this. So in the book, I can remember exploring, for example, what happens in a country with a high immigrant population and there is shared language erosion, where the children and grandchildren have not been able to maintain a heritage language. But there is still someone, there is a migrant living in the country who perhaps has not been able to access high quality education in, let's say, English, if we're talking about the UK, and their children and grandchildren may actually not be able to communicate in the heritage language in order to translate and make sure that their needs are understood by healthcare workers. That leads to problems. This is why, as you'll know far better than me, the immense amount of effort that hospitals go to in order to provide translation and interpreting services for people. Additionally, when it comes to vulnerable and endangered languages, there's been evidence from British Columbia that being able to maintain an indigenous language in that part of the world, there seems to be some connection to the lowering of youth suicide rates. So, maintaining a language, what does it mean? It means much more than just being able to still remember the words and the grammar. It means you have this sort of resilient, continuous link to something that's important to you.
So, yeah, I guess language is more than just the written word or the spoken word. It's about the sort of the culture of the people. And I can see how in a lot of circumstances where preserving a language can help a community's mental health, especially if that's the only language they speak and it's dying and then they can't communicate with other people. There's a risk of social isolation, which we know is bad for cognitive function and mental health. But I guess from the physical side of things as well, if they cannot communicate with other people about health concerns. For me, also, language has also been about food. I'm at the intersection of multiple languages and cultures. I speak Hindi, Tamil, and English, and I've never felt that I've quite belonged in any of one of those three specifically. Probably the one I've felt most kind of at home with is Tamil, because that's where my great grandparents were originally from. And, as I've grown older, there's this nostalgia where you associate language with family, the elderly relatives, food. And for me, it's a source of comfort as well. And I remember the reason I'm so in touch with my, I guess, ancestral food is because I used to communicate with my grandparents who obviously didn't speak a lot of English, and I used to spend summers with them and they used to speak Tamil, and the food was a huge part of that culture. So I wonder, going forwards, nutritionally, we know that people who eat certain types of foods specific to their culture have certain health outcomes, as opposed to if they turn to a Western diet. We've got countless of examples of people who, eat an Asian diet, like a South Asian or Southeast Asian diet, then move to Western countries and start eating a greater abundance of processed food and a Western diet, which is traditionally very fiber deplete. They suddenly have a change in their microbiome makeup and they have a worsening of their health outcomes compared to other Westerners who are native in that country and eating an ultra processed diet. So there's such a dramatic shift.
That's reminded me of a trip that I had to do for the book. So I have a personal connection to all of this in that apart from I have studied languages as a child and an adult, I'm half Italian, and I grew up with my Italian mum, born here, English dad, and it's Italy-born nonna. I feel like I had three parents. I had three people raising me, and mum and nonna would always speak to each other in what they would have called il dialetto, which is in standard Italian, il dialetto, a dialect. They're not wrong in that it's a dialect, but it's not a dialect of Italian. It's a dialect or variety of one of the many languages that are in Italy today that you won't have heard of, because the nation building project of Italy made Italian the language and all the other languages sort of lesser in value. And I went back to Piacenza, where my family is from, in the north of Italy, in search of il dialetto to speak to people who still speak it today, because it's very endangered, and reconnect with it in some way. And if you are in Piacenza, you are not going to see Piacente or il dialetto anywhere, really. It's not necessarily going to be on shop signs or any kind of signage. But if you go to a traditional restaurant and you look at the menu, you are absolutely going to find dishes. And that's possibly during your average working day. If you're one of the younger generation who have long sort of stopped speaking Piacente, that might be where you find it, and you'll speak it because you're going to be ordering it for your lunch or for your dinner. I think food is an amazing vehicle for great understanding about language. I have a series. I haven't done an episode recently, but I have a series that I do on my TikTok and Instagram called Eatamology, like the origins of food words. And if you just take the UK and you look at sort of a recipe book or a menu here, if you were to trace the origins of the words, it is exceedingly international. There are even words that actually do preserve almost fossils of languages long gone. An example of that being the humble potato. We know that one of the words that has given us the word potato today comes from a language long gone from the Americas. So yeah, absolutely, food is a great way to appreciate language.
I think even there's such a wide body of research suggesting that being bilingual or just activating the brain and engaging with learning new things, whether it's a hobby or even learning a new language, can reduce the risk of dementia by building that cognitive reserve. So even if it was more than a hobby and as a tool to protect your brain against, the marches of aging, it's a pretty effective tool. And I mean, you recently wrote an article suggesting that Brits need to speak more languages. Beyond what we've just discussed about the sort of cultural relevance and being more, preserving languages and, learning more, maybe the health benefits, why do you feel that, Brits should learn new languages?
It's interesting because when I'm sat down with someone and I'm being invited to persuade them, or in this case, thinking of persuading perhaps your listeners and viewers, I want to know what stopped you. If you are someone who has not been able to commit to learning a language, what stopped you? And in a lot of cases, especially like if Duolingo survey users and they want to find out why has someone picked this language over that one, we know that a major incentive is need. If you are a monolingual English speaker, you've possibly never been presented with need to learn another language because you've become so accustomed to other people speaking English. And what I have to do in that scenario is attempt to quantify and qualify what you missed out on because of that. So, of course, what have you benefited from? You've benefited from, in theory, loads of communication and understanding because other people made an effort that you didn't. But what did you miss out on because those other people made that effort? As you've just mentioned, there are many cognitive benefits that come with it. Anyone anecdotally who's multilingual would be able to describe all of the moments of like personal in-joke understanding, all of these things that are really hard to kind of amass and present to someone as this is why you should learn this. The fact that things can go on around me and I know what is happening is very basic, but very important human function for being happy and healthy in the long term. And that's what learning languages can give you. On a personal basis, you're going to earn more money. You're more likely to earn more if you speak, particularly the languages that are frequently requested still in the age of AI translation in job applications. For me, I love languages so much. I don't think I ever felt the weight of need, but I did study Spanish and Arabic, and particularly in my late 20s and 30s, as I am getting older, doing my own, family and life planning, I am really reconnecting with my Italian heritage. And I've realized that if I do not reconnect with it now, it's a lot of my identity connection will be gone. So that need is really there and is a great motivating factor. So for me, you've got to find what the need is.
This is something I am ridiculously excited about, and I've been using it for a while now myself. We've all got wearables for our sleep, steps, heart rate, but the one thing we don't track, the thing that actually tells you more about your health than almost anything else, is your bathroom data. And that's why I joined the team at Throne Science. Throne is the world's first hands-free smart toilet platform that turns your everyday bathroom habits into real actionable health insights. It uses computer vision and sensors to analyze stool shape, color, consistency, frequency, even patterns like straining and time spent sitting on the toilet. And I've been helping to build out the science as well. No forbidden photos on your phone, no awkward Excel spreadsheets. You just do what you normally do, and Throne gives you trends that actually matter for your gut health, hydration, fiber intake, and even early warning signs you'd normally miss. If you want to be one of the early people to try this or just follow the journey, head to thronescience.com. That's thronescience.com. Trust me, it will be your gut's new best friend. I found that a lot of people who speak one specific language will have trouble enunciating complex, exotic mouth positions, which other languages might require you to have. Like, an Arabic speaker has a greater mastery of guttural noises than an English-speaking person who just speaks English. Similarly, someone who speaks a range of different Indian languages has also a greater range of vocal acrobatics than someone who just speaks English. And I wonder, and I have no specific literature to cite in this occasion beyond just the mechanistic understanding that as you're learning a language when you're a baby and then growing up as a child, you're training your mouth, vocal cords, and thus your brain, and then that shapes your reality and your world around you. I wonder what the impact is of having a narrow vocabulary by means of just knowing one language, and then how that shapes your perception of things, but also how that shapes your brain and your body structure, maybe your breathing. I don't know, all these other things. And this leads me to the other thought that I watched an interesting TED talk years ago, which was talking about the role of language that shapes your perception of reality. And how in a lot of these classic romantic languages, in French and Italian, there's certain words, certain nouns which are associated with a gender. If it's like a bridge, could be female in French, or it could be male in German. And depending on the gender, that dictates how people speak about a certain thing. So in a certain language, if bridge is a male gendered, then it's strong and sturdy. But in a language where a bridge is seen as female, it's beautiful and carries you across, and there's a different connotation. So I wonder, just knowing different languages, how that would influence your perception of the world around you. I mean, that's a very philosophical question, but I wonder how big a role that plays into someone's life.
You've presented two massive things there. This is where it gets really nerdy. So when it comes to the first thing that you mentioned, which is observing that people with a wider linguistic portfolio literally may be able to present with like different uses of their mouth. They'll be able to pronounce things differently. We know that sort of communication skills are improved in your mother tongue if you learn other languages, because you get to understand how language works, because you're being forced to sort of reconsider, well, I've always known that I say this by doing this, but now you're saying I can say the same thing in another language, but with a completely different structure. So you start suddenly seeing the sort of skeleton of English makes itself visible to you in a way that you never would have known beforehand. You also I was thinking the other day between Spanish and Arabic, how I think with Spanish, I am using a lot of familiar sounds and sort of mouth movements, phonetics that I have access to in English, or that I have access to because I was raised in an Italian speaking household. The rolled R, for example, has never been a problem for me. But I know lots of monolingual English people who could not roll an R. The Arabic sounds, on the other hand, had to take like a lot of training while I was at university. And sometimes my Arabic professor would literally we would spend 10 minutes, everyone just having to repeatedly make this sound because it was so alien to us. And we needed to be given the time and opportunity to give it a go, feel it. And still to this day, there is a letter in Arabic called the ain, and it's like a glottal sound. And every time I do it, I have like a maybe 50% chance that I'll get it right. I felt it there. I didn't quite do it right. But if you keep doing it, go like, al-ain, that was it. That was it. You kind of almost have to log in and do it better. There's another one in Arabic. So in English, K and Q kind of come from the same place in your mouth. But in Arabic, you have ka, and then you also have qa, which comes from a completely different part of the mouth. And like, if you don't give yourself the time and like play around and even look at maps, there are really interesting visualizations of the mouth that can really help you pronounce things better. And you'll never have seen those visualizations of mouths if you've not sort of approached studying linguistics. That's the only opportunity you get to see it. Or if you're an actor doing, like dialect coaching. The other thing you said is a theory called linguistic determinism. So you were talking about scenarios where the language we speak appears to shape how we think. And this has been a theory explored in linguistics for probably longer than a century, but certainly it was in the 20th century when a couple of linguists put forward a hypothesis, the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, which was, if a language sort of puts something in a particular way, does that mean the people who speak it think in this way? And what linguists have kind of decided on, there are people who sort of think very differently around this, but what they've kind of settled on is that there is something to it, maybe, but not quite. So for example, we do know that in languages where you may perceive of the future to be in front of you and the past behind you, but some people see the past in front of them and the future behind them. But does that mean that if you said to that person, oh, but I see the past in front of me, that they can't possibly understand that? No, of course they can. Also, untranslatable words, they always go viral. There are loads of sort of posts online about untranslatable words from Japanese and Danish and stuff. And they're not untranslatable because I give you the word, I then tell you the meaning of it. And all of a sudden, yes, you've understood the meaning of it. It's just that your language does not have one singular word, perhaps, that totally adequately describes this concept. And that tells me that the culture that you're from has prioritized something enough to render a word out of it. It doesn't mean that your culture would be like incapable of considering other ways of seeing and thinking. So one of the biggest criticisms of the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis is that if you start believing that languages dictate how we think rather than influence or reveal how we think, it gets towards like eugenics pretty quickly. So that's another reason why you'll find some people on the internet super sensitive about this, and often for good reason.
I do think in one specific case, this may be more of a practical application of that hypothesis, which I think has some merit in, specifically in the world where I come from, in the medical world, the topic of cancer and how people perceive cancer and their outcomes with that. And there's a lot of war and battle analogies which are used with cancer. So-and-so survived breast cancer, so-and-so is battling a certain type of cancer or has fought or beaten cancer, and it anthropomorphizes cancer into a living entity. And I think a lot of people like the challenge of facing up against cancer, but I also think it can be quite detrimental because it then implies that someone who passed away from cancer was not strong enough or didn't fight enough. So in that sort of context, I think it can be both good and bad, depending on which side of the fence you're on. Both someone looking at someone else suffering with cancer, or actually the person undergoing it feeling like they're either a failure or something else if something doesn't go right. So in that context, how you perceive cancer or a certain treatment, how in the medical world we use certain words like a patient failed this treatment, meaning, is almost somehow implying that the treatment's fine, but the patient didn't respond to it, Even that, patient didn't respond to this therapy. It's not the patient's fault, it's just it didn't work for that specific gene mutation or that specific variant of the disease. And I think there are so many instances in the medical world where the words are just so out of place and almost shuttle blame to the patient,
And there are some scenarios where either phraseology is altered a little bit. So it's quite common, I think, in healthcare that there'll be new guidance issued about how to speak about certain things because, healthcare professionals have decided that perhaps the way we used to talk about this wasn't really helpful. I remember doing an interview once. This was back when I was a Vice news reporter, and when I did my first book, which was about sexual health and investigating how sort of porn addiction had been made a public health crisis in the United States when it actually didn't exist as a sort of classified health diagnosis. And I remember it in one of those interviews with an expert who'd been looking into it. He told me how we're sort of decreasingly calling things addictions these days because the research suggests a clinician thinks an addiction is less treatable. Whereas we know that if I think a lot like disorders, or there are other nouns that are used sort of a lot more commonly these days, because it's believed that everyone involved will believe something could be more treated than if you gave it a name that makes people think it's impossible to treat this. There have also been in languages besides English efforts to change the names of conditions. So in Japanese, for example, they changed the name of schizophrenia to something that essentially carried less stigma than what their word for schizophrenia had acquired over time. And they saw a rapid increase in diagnoses after this word change. And of course, it's not necessarily the case that all of a sudden way more Japanese people happen to have schizophrenia in that time period. It would have been because a reduction in stigma would have perhaps made people happier diagnosing others with it, or receiving a diagnosis that they had schizophrenia. So it's really interesting. There are so many fascinating like language facts in the world of healthcare and medicine. I think, have you made content before about how many like things in the body are named by the men who sort of discovered them, sort of especially the female body?
Female anatomy, yeah, crazy. But also like what's also quite sad is how traditionally both healthcare providers and patients and the general public have euphemized a lot of important topics, whether it's cancer and calling it a growth or a lesion, and almost making it so clinical that you can sidestep it, or even the word death. I think when I first started as a doctor, there was a patient I was treating, and I saw them every day for a week. And then I was on annual leave, and then I came back and I asked, "Hey, where's this patient?" And one of the nurses said, "Oh, she's gone to Rose Cottage." And I had no idea what that meant. Is that another department? Is that the sort of pre-discharge lounge, or what's going on? And Rose Cottage is a phrase which is a euphemism for end of life or / died. Or we say in God's waiting room, or is passing, or there's words to sanitize death instead of just calling it death. And I think it might sound a bit grim, but actually speaking about death and acknowledging that time is finite makes for a more vivid and engaging lifetime, but also allows someone to plan. I think one of the most sad things and tragic things is that the average person doesn't care enough about death until the point where they're very unwell. And then there's a last minute mad scramble to sort out ceilings of care, how they want to, be in their last few days or weeks, what level of care they want. Do they want an incubator? Do they want ventilation? Do they want surgery? They're making those decisions at the end of their life where they're almost incapacitated, where actually maybe you should be thinking about it now. And I think that's because of how we've been so afraid to talk about certain words. They provoke so much fear and awkwardness and embarrassment in us.
That reminds me of challenges I've had writing about linguicide. So, for example, I have a book behind me that was written not that long ago, but it's called Language Death, because linguicide, the phenomenon of language killing, what is the end result of language killing? Language death. I have seen in my own family how emigrant language loss, as well as critical language endangerment of languages that have not been given any sort of protection or provisions, they will disappear to the point that they are no longer spoken. And there is debate within the kind of language revitalization community whether we should be calling this language death when in theory, languages can be revived and revitalized, and that's true. So, can you have language death if you can reinvigorate language life? That's one thing. But equally, can we really speak of languages that have lost all of their speakers as living still? Or is it okay to understand there is both language death and life, and it can be one or the other? So in the work that I do, and I talk about linguicide, I often have to euphemize depending on who I'm speaking to. Is this someone who would actually find it incredibly insensitive and painful to think that their community's language has gone, in which case I would not use the phrase language death. I'm happy using the phrase language death for what I've seen unfold in my own family. You know, I'm happy using it in a personal way, but I'm not going to use it with someone who I feel like would feel completely ostracized from the conversation I want to have with them because of it. But I don't want to let the agents of linguicide off scot-free. I am nervous that if we say that language death is not a thing that happens, that they're going to think, well, then it's fine not to protect or support languages, because you can always bring it back if you really want to. I do not want that to happen either. So these euphemisms are present in linguistics.
We've seen, obviously, with language death and language reinvigoration, there's also, as cultures evolve, there's also an evolution of languages. So, even a
Yes.
few hundred years ago, if the average English speaking person from the 12th century or 13th century were brought to this day, we probably wouldn't be able to understand what they were saying, even if they were speaking English. And I've gone on those, deep dive rabbit holes in YouTube where I've seen how English has evolved over the centuries. And it's so dramatic, even in the space of a couple of hundred years, how it just sounds completely different. And what do you think about the role of AI and ChatGPT and large language models changing how we not only evolve our speaking and potentially thinking, but how it makes everything so bland, to the point where I am more active on LinkedIn these days, and I just see a whole swathe of regurgitated AI slop. And, this is now not even M dashes anymore. I'm just talking about generic phrases that are, it's not this, it's that, or here's the kicker. If you're using phrases like that, I won't be able to take someone seriously, because if you can't even put some care into your thoughts and opinions, is it even worthy of me listening to you? And I think that's a worrying thing. And so I'm really interested to know what your take is on how AI is changing our cultural lexicon for better or worse.
It would also possibly alarm you to know that we're beginning to speak like ChatGPT, because if it's just a human phenomenon, we're so good at speaking and communicating that when we see or hear words increasingly, more commonly used, we're probably going to more commonly use them ourselves. And even when I'm watching stuff on TV, which is pretty rare these days, I don't really watch much TV, but you will hear people using perhaps delve. Let's delve into in a way that I
Quietly.
think, yeah, in a way that I kind of think, oh, would you have said that before? But we already have evidence that people are beginning to speak like ChatGPT, even when they're not reading off something that was prompted by it. Since the invention of the printing press by Gutenberg hundreds and hundreds of years ago, and the modern project of nation state building and making certain languages official in those nation states, we have gone through an era of like language standardization unique in the course of human history. So before printed books, widespread literacy, there were no sort of standard ways to speak. There may have been standard ways for like a literate class to write in and speak, but really this is quite new. The vast majority of the world's languages are unwritten. Only about 100 languages have a written tradition. So a lot of what we know about language standardization, we only have like a few hundreds of years of data for it. But language, you are right, absolutely does change. So when I talk about linguicide, I'm talking about this sort of like unnatural change. A language has been cut off, like a bloodline has been stopped rather than allowed to go forth and evolve. And English is a great example of a language that has evolved over centuries and centuries. You are absolutely right that if you go to our comparatively distant past, we wouldn't be able to understand anything they were saying. Even predating the Norman invasion, the kind of English that would have been spoken is very different without that Norman influence. And with the advent of artificial intelligence, I think a major point I see sort of directly in my own career and the work that I do, which is so focused around video content and just even looking at the auto transcriptions and auto subtitling, just like forces me into American English. Far more American English text, it seems, has informed these Silicon Valley founded companies than British English. And I have to fight to make sure something is spelled in the way that I was raised spelling things, for example. So I think something I see that I don't see talked about nearly enough is, yes, worry about all the M dashes, which are American punctuation, by the way, more than they are British. Yes, maybe worry about some of the constructions, but on the internet, we also have like British English variety at stake. And that's something I feel a connection to. So I want to keep writing in the way that I like to write. And I don't want anyone interfering with that. Certainly not a machine.
Only 5% of us are feeding our guts properly. That means 95% of us are accidentally starving our microbiomes, and we feel it through bloating, sluggish digestion, and other symptoms and health challenges. That's why I created Loam, a 6-in-1 prebiotic fiber blend designed to cultivate a nourished, thriving gut. Each serving delivers 10 grams of plant-based fibers, making it that much easier to feed the gut bacteria that fuel your digestion, immune system, metabolism, mood, and more. And the best part is it's completely invisible. No taste, no texture, no grit. Loam dissolves into anything and literally disappears into your day. If you want your whole health to thrive, start by feeding the ecosystem that runs the show. Head to www.loamscience.com to try Loam. And exclusively for you, just because you're listening to this podcast, get an additional 10% off with the code POD10. Again, that's POD10 to try Loam and get an additional 10% off. Loam, health grows here. On the topic of AI, obviously it has a role to play in information gathering and giving as well, and how it changed languages. But also on the other side of things, AI is becoming an incumbent in our daily lives. We're using them to outsource minor bits of work, major bits of work, and the speed of evolution of AI is both impressive but also quite worrying. As someone who's personally been the victim of multiple deepfakes online as a health information provider, is again concerning, because the rate of evolution of AI is coming to the point of sometimes it's hard to tell the difference between what is AI and what is real. And I think that's the concern online, where there's so much misinformation, but also so much content. One video can be viewed by someone and it can be completely wrong. In the example of I had a deep fake of me that somewhat sounded like me. This was months ago, so I'm sure the models are a lot better now, but it sounded like me, probably at least a 7 out of 10, and it looked like me, again, probably a 7 or 8 out of 10, and it was selling random natural herbal supplements, which could have all sorts of harm. And I got countless followers of mine who messaged me asking me what the dose they should take, where they can buy them, are there any contraindications according to the medications they were taking to take that as well. And for me, that was the biggest shock, that I knew it wasn't me, obviously, but the people who followed me couldn't quite tell. A lot of people couldn't tell. A lot of people could tell it was AI, but a lot of people couldn't. What is the worry with AI that it gets to the point where it's actually starting to harm people beyond just their interactions with AI and getting wrong medical advice, but actual real quality deepfakes, to the point of there could be people intentionally providing harmful health information to hurt people?
Let's not forget here that it's not individuals' fault that they have been misled by content that should never have made it onto that
Yeah.
platform in the first place. We have to keep this conversation about naughty platforms not doing what they should be doing. There has been a lot of discussion in the press in the last couple of weeks about AI scams on Meta in particular, and Meta failing to do a job that it should have done. Because, of course, if you are putting an ad on Meta's platform, they are making money out of it.
Yeah.
You're asking them to bin loads of opportunities to make money when you're telling them to be smarter about AI scams. So platforms have to do a far better job here in preventing this content from ever being uploaded. That is going to get more and more challenging. This isn't an easy challenge for platforms, but they do have like more money than anyone else on the planet right now. If anyone's going to find a solution, it's them with their bandwidth and their like enormous data grab that they do. They have so many points of information. They can work it out, and they should. On the flip side, yes, you had followers who were misled, and that's really scary. You also had followers who knew it was AI. And the fact that you are so vocal, you are a really transparent content creator. You do talk to your audience about moments like someone has tried to deepfake me. You talk about the process. You have your new company now that you're building in public, because like transparency is like a really core value to you. And because people know how attached to your values you are as a doctor, and how there are things you would never dream of selling, and how there are people who've tried to pay you loads of money to sell them and you still say no, because you've told people that, and you keep telling people that, they might one day see an even better deepfake of you, and there will be people thinking something's not right about this, because my Dr. Karan Raj would never do this. And you have that power because you've built an audience to give people that instinct. Imagine all of the people who have not bothered to ever make any vertical video, who are experts in their field, who have not given public audiences the opportunity to have that instinct, because they don't know that you'd never sell something like that. They don't know that you'd never say a sort of inaccurate piece of information like that. So it does feel really scary. We're right to be annoyed and worried. Keep the blame on platforms, and keep being authentic and showing up online, because you're giving people, in that instinct, you're giving them resilience against some of this fake stuff.
I mean, there are multiple points here, because yes, the platforms need to do more, but even some of, I think a lot of people use the editing tool CapCut, which is a subsidiary essentially of ByteDance, and all of these platforms obviously take our information that creators and the average person willingly, voluntarily provide to them, and are, probably automatically signing terms and agreements, which are updated probably on a weekly, monthly basis, to allow sub-licensing and use of their data to train AI models. So that's an issue. And secondly, beyond the platforms, the brands, because now as a startup founder, I'm learning more about meta ads, for example, to increase the reach of videos, to reach new audiences who might be interested in your product. And looking at the back end, I see all sorts of dodginess going on, where there are huge brands, and I won't be naming them here, who use AI influencers to review products. I understand the use of AI to maybe showcase the science. You use some AI graphics and visuals to explain the science or explain the technical specs of a product. That seems fair. But then using an AI-generated influencer as user-generated content to talk glowingly about a product and review the product, that just seems like straight-up lying, where they would get maybe, a young woman in her 20s or 30s wearing athleisure, talking about some colostrum or vitamin gummies and saying how useful they were. That is not a real person talking about a real use case. So that's straight up lying to a consumer. And that's as bad as making a health claim on a product that's not regulated by medical regulators for substances. And so that's what I don't get, where actually behind AI there's always a person or a company or a brand, and they should be held to task if they're using AI to actually lie to people about something. But they exist and they make a lot of money online.
And the only way we're going to know about it is from exposing malpractice. That's what I call it, AI malpractice. I have found that becoming more AI literate has made me more sensitive to AI malpractice because I spot it. So even you know, perhaps for the first time in your career, having to run meta ads, you suddenly see this whole layer of AI malpractice that you weren't aware of, that you would never have known about if you didn't upskill and figure out, how do I make a meta ad? So there are all these opportunities to figure things out. It's been really helpful for me, both as a platform accountability reporter and a media innovator, because I do a lot of work in media innovation these days. And when news audiences, for example, are surveyed about AI tools they are happy with newsrooms using, they have very roundly told us they don't mind AI being used as long as a human is in the loop. And if you ask journalists about AI tools they'd be happy using, if you tell them, hey, there's this really boring job you do that takes hours out of your week and takes you away from creative, impactful journalism, this AI tool can help you do it in seconds rather than hours. Do you want it? A journalist is going to be like, what, you're going to help me do more of my job and less of the boring stuff? Yes, please. If you tell a journalist, hey, here's an AI tool that writes for you, thinks for you, does journalism for you, use it, the journalist is going to be like, no, I went into this profession to do journalism and I could do it better than a machine. Thank you very much. So I think in a lot of professions, we are going to see that. We're going to see the promotion of tools that don't replace humans. We hopefully will also see the promotion of tools where we know that things like data privacy have been taken really seriously. So to take CapCut as an example, as a content creator and as an app builder, I have built an app in the journalism space that does use AI to look at the data and rights grab that is in the terms and conditions of CapCut has been very distressing to me as a content creator. Therefore, if I build something, as I've built with my app, Sofiana, I'm so not going to build it in that way because that's not what I want to put out in the world. I would hate it. So I would expect customers to hate it as well. I have to make something better and something that actually promotes good practice as opposed to bad. I think some of these big tech people just don't feel embarrassed by it. They can do these maneuvers with impunity and make money, and they don't really fear consequences of what seems to be maybe a few people being annoyed with them. I don't really know. But if you think about platform accountability in the past, platforms change because of kind of seismic societal rejection that equals they lose money. Threaten a company with losing money and they'll change their ways. But if they're going to just keep making it, then they're not going to change.
I think, someone can take away two pretty powerful things from this conversation that, I think would be very handy life skills, both for themselves and maybe to pass on for future generations, is be proactive when it comes to AI. We can't put the genie back in the bottle. So understand how these tools work, understand how your rights are being infringed upon, and actually use these tools to understand how to protect yourself better. And also when it comes to languages as well. I mean, if you are monolingual, maybe start trying to learn a few other things because it has physical and mental health benefits, and it probably makes you a more confident communicator as well. And I've really enjoyed chatting to you, and I hope a lot of people can apply these in their daily lives. Thank you so much, Sophia.
Thank you.
I really hope you enjoyed this episode. Please subscribe to the channel if you've taken anything away from today's conversation. If you want to learn more about loam science and the novel 6-in-1 prebiotic fiber, you can go to loamscience.com. And remember, if you'd like to find out even more about Throne and their incredible new smart toilet device, go to thronescience.com.